I'm Minal Bopaiah, and I am the founder of Brevity Wit, a strategy and design firm dedicated to designing a more equitable world. I'm also the author of Equity: How to Design Organizations Where Everyone Thrives. Now, equity is really critical in how we design our organizations because what it allows for is for everyone, every employee, every staff member, even our customers, to have full access or equal access to opportunity. So how do we do this? How do we design our organizations? Brevity Wit uses a human-centered design approach. And while there are some criticisms of human-centered design, the virtue of it is that it really does put the human nature at the center of how we start to design organizations. We use a lot of behavioral science to inform our designs so that we're working with human nature instead of against it. The first thing that we often do in organizations is try to get leadership in particular to see the system. Because bias has been baked into many of our systems, including how we design organizations. You know, I often say that corporate America was really designed with white, able-bodied Christian men in mind, who were also heterosexual and married to women who could pick up all of the housework for free. And then nonprofit America seems to have somewhat been designed with white, married women in mind, in that the salaries were often lower because many of the women working in that space were married and didn't need a second income. It's very hard for single people to make a living wage in nonprofits often. So when we can get people to see the system and who is centered in the design, what we can do is then start to look at who is marginalized, how can we put them in the center, and redesign our organizations to serve them as well. And what we often find is that these redesigns then benefit a lot more people. So the invention of flex time, which was really meant for parents, has allowed a lot of people the ability to take care of their relatives, whether they're parents or not, or even given them just the flexibility to design a life that works for them. After leadership is engaged, the next thing we often ask organizations to do is to be really clear about what are the equitable outcomes you want. What's your goal? What are you reaching for? And then ascribe observable behaviors to those outcomes. What is it that you need to see your leaders or your employees doing differently in order to reach that outcome? And being able to operationalize your equity outcomes is really important for reifying the change you want to see in your organization. Finally, we then ask organizations to look at their system and to see how their policies and procedures, how their structure either supports inclusive and equitable behaviors or doesn't. So for example, if we're in a hospital, if we say that the observable equitable behavior or an observable act of inclusion would be for every staff member to use the patient's name when interacting with them, one of the ways that we can design the hospital to support that is to have a big whiteboard in the room with the patient's name so that any hospital staff member, the minute they walk in, is reminded of the patient's name and able to use it easily. Throughout this process, we're also communicating about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we talk a lot about how we can use behavior change science to create more effective communications that generate more buy-in and make it easier to work around the resistance that might exist in organizations to any sort of change. And then finally, we talk about media. Any organization with a social media account is fundamentally a media organization in some way, shape, or form these days. And as Mahzarin Banaji says, bias is the thumbprint of culture on the brain, and I like to add that media are the ink pad. So the external messaging that you're putting out there is how all of our biases are getting coded, or how all of our biases might be decoded or mitigated or, recoded into something new. And so we talk a lot in the book about how organizations can be more mindful of the content they're creating using an equity lens so that their content and all of their media is really inclusive and advocating for a world where people have equal access to opportunity.